Hello everyone on the internet as we know it today. Today I am here to deliver a seminar on the topic Big Data. First, allow me to introduce myself. I am PuruAgarwal. I am currently pursuing BTech Computer Science at Bennett University. I am currently in my 6th semester right now. Now let's hop on. So this is just a list of topics that we will be going through in this seminar. I will be taking you through the basics of big data and we will also discuss about the need of big data. Here are some facts and figures to get you a little hyped up about big data. Just take a note of the humongous amounts of data being generated. This would have raised some questions in your mind. I hope you find the answers in this seminar. Before we start exploring big data, firstly I want to ask you, what is data? According to Google, data is facts and statistics collected for reference or analysis. Basically, any useful information can be treated as data. Now, the term big data is a bit of a misnomer since it implies that pre-existing data is somehow small or that the only challenge is its sheer size. But size is one of them, but there are often more. If you are a tech enthusiast, you should know this. Data is the center of everything. So finally, what is big data? Big data is a collection of data that is huge in volume yet growing exponentially with time. It is the data with so large size and complexity that none of the traditional data management tools can store it or process it efficiently. Big data is also data but with huge size. There is no single correct definition of big data. You will find tons of definition online conveying the same thing, which is huge amounts of data. I'll tell you an example of big data. The New York Stock Exchange is an example of big data. It generates about 1 terabyte of new trade data per day. Big data is like small data but bigger in size. However, having more data necessitates a variety of methodologies, strategies, tools, and architecture in order to handle old or new problems more effectively. Big data creates value by storing and processing massive amounts of digital data that can't be evaluated using typical computer methods. A fun fact about big data is Germany used big data to win the 2014 FIFA World Cup. Again, some stats about some popular companies generating huge amounts of data. And on the right, you can see an image talking about the market forecast of big data. Decoding the human genome originally took 10 years to process. Now it can be done in 1 week. This is something I found really interesting. Also, by the end of this seminar, you might realize that size does matter after all. What are the characteristics of big data? There are three major properties of big data: volume, velocity, and variety. At many places you will find 4 or even 5 characteristics of big data, but ultimately it boils down to these three features. Let us discuss the first characteristic of big data, that is volume. Yes, we are going to talk about size first. The sheer volume of data being stored today is exploding. In the year 2000, 8 lakh petabytes of data were stored in the world. Of course, a lot of the data that's being created today isn't analyzed at all, and that's another problem that needs to be considered. Twitter alone generates 7 terabyte of data every day, and Facebook 10 terabyte. And some enterprises generate terabytes of data every hour of every day of the year. It's no longer unheard of for individual enterprises to have storage clusters holding petabytes of data. When you stop and think about it, it's a little wonder that we are drowning in data. We store everything: environmental data, financial data, medical data, surveillance data, and the list goes on and on. For example, taking your smartphone out of your holster generates an event. When your commuter train's door opens for boarding, that's an event. Check in for a plane, badge into work, buy a song on iTunes, change the TV channel, take an electronic toll route. Every one of these actions generates data. Now let us talk about the second characteristic of big data, that is complexity or variety. The volume associated with the big data phenomena brings along new challenges for data centers trying to deal with it. Its variety. With the explosion of sensors and smart devices, as well as social collaboration technologies, data in an enterprise has become complex because it includes not only traditional relational data but also raw, semi-structured and unstructured data from web pages, web blog files, search indexes, social media forums, email, documents, and etc. and etc. What's more, traditional systems can struggle to store and perform the required analytics to gain understanding from the contents of these logs because much of the information being generated doesn't lend itself to traditional database technologies. In my experience, although some companies are moving down the path, by and large, most of most are just beginning to understand the opportunities of big data. Quite simply, variety represents all types of data. A fundamental shift in analysis requirements from traditional structured data to include raw, semi-structured and unstructured data as part of the decision making and its insight process. Now let us discuss the third characteristic of big data, that is speed or velocity. Just as the sheer volume and variety of data that we collect and store has changed, so too has the velocity at which it is generated and needs to be handled. A conventional understanding of velocity typically considers how quickly the data is arriving and stored and its associated rates of retrieval. While managing all of that quickly is good, and the volumes of data that we are looking at are a consequence of how quickly the data arrives. To accommodate velocity, a new way of thinking about a problem must start at the inception point of the data. Rather than confining the idea of velocity to the growth rates associated with your data repositories, we suggest you apply this definition to data in motion, the speed at which the data is flowing. Just to sum it up, here is a diagram explaining the three V's of big data. Just have a look at it. So now that we have discussed the characteristics of big data, let us discuss some other aspects as well. How we will store these huge amounts of data. Obviously, first we'll analyze the data, try to structure it a bit, and eliminate the redundant values. Then I have given here an overview of big data stores in this slide. Uh, some technologies mentioned like Hadoop and HBase are quite popular. You might have heard of them. So now that we have analyzed our data and we know about the existing solutions to store our data, we can select a big data store. Choosing the correct data store is based on your data characteristics. Processing big data. Big data processing is a set of techniques or programming models to access large scale data to extract useful information for supporting and providing decisions. One of the very popular techniques of processing big data is employing Hadoop MapReduce. Let's talk about the structure of big data. Firstly, structured data. It's the data which follows a predefined format and thus is straightforward to analyze. It conforms a tabular format together with relationships between different rows and columns. You can think of an SQL database as a common example. The second type is semi-structured data. It is a type of big data that doesn't conform with a formal structure or data models, comes from but it comes with some kinds of organizational tags or other markers that help to separate semantic elements as well as enforce hierarchies of fields and records with the data. You can think of JSON documents or XML files as this type of big data. Thirdly, we'll talk about unstructured data. This type of big data comes with unknown form and cannot be stored in traditional ways and cannot be analyzed unless it is transformed into a structured format. You can think of multimedia content like audios, videos, images as examples of unstructured form of data. It's important to understand that these days unstructured data is growing faster than other types of big data. So far we have discussed quite a bit about big data, but still the question remains, why big data is needed? There are many reasons that the growth of big data is needed. Firstly, every day with passing time, The amount of data being generated is growing exponentially. Companies use big data in their systems to improve operations, provide better customer service, create personalized marketing campaigns, and take other actions that ultimately can increase revenue and profits. One of the questions that still remains is how big data is different. Big data is generally automatically generated by a machine. It is an entirely new source of data. It is not designed to be friendly, and a major part of the data being generated, which we call as big data, may not have much value. Either this data needs focus on the important sections. Big data ecosystem. The big data ecosystem is the comprehension of massive functional components with various enabling tools. Capabilities of the big data ecosystem are not only about computing and storing big data but also the advantages of its semantic platform and potentials of big data analytics. The diagram given here is quite self-explanatory. When we talk about storing, hosting, program, and running programming models in big data, we we are also talking about cloud. We use a lot of cloud services when we are dealing with big data. So who is generating big data? Everyone is generating big data. Any random data, any random event triggered generates data, and in turn it becomes part of big data. The model of generating or consuming data has changed. Earlier, few companies were generating data and all others were consuming data. In the current scenario, all of us are generating data and all of us are consuming the data. Every imaginable field with huge amounts of data has applications of big data analytics. You talk about healthcare enterprises, search quality, manufacturing, everywhere. How big data impacts on IT? Big data will change how even the smallest companies do business as data collection and interpretation become more accessible. New, innovative, and cost effective technologies are constantly emerging and improving that makes it incredibly easy for any organization to seamlessly implement big data solutions. Big data is a troublesome force presenting opportunities and challenges to IT organizations. But big data in a long run will have a great positive impact on IT. One of the major challenges in handling big data is the bottleneck in technology. New architecture algorithm techniques are needed. Even though new architecture or techniques are hitting the market quite frequently, it creates a confusion while selecting tools for big data. Also, there is a challenge in technical skills. Experts are needed in using the new technologies and dealing with big data. Let us discuss the risks of big data. Dealing with such large amounts of data can be overwhelming. So we need the right people with the right skills to solve the right problems. Also, analyzing such large amounts of data completely or 100% is not possible, thereby creating the blind zone. What is the blind zone? You don't know what it might be. It might be something great or it might be nothing at all. But the don't know is the problem or the opportunity depending on how you look at it. The conversation about data volumes has changed from terabytes to petabytes with an inevitable shift to zettabytes. And all this data can't be stored in your traditional systems, which escalates the cost too fast as we need a large number of resources. And obviously, when we are talking about data, we have to address the issue of privacy. So let us call it a day here for the seminar. Hope you enjoyed and learned something new. Thank you.